Hey, what's up, everybody? Time for another game theory video, teaching you something that you might be surprised to find out about. In this example, this actually does work in Alpha 2 as well, but this goes along with that Street Fighter Alpha was actually designed with a lot of sort of more intricate footsies than you might think at first glance. And that Alpha 2 example was showing you an example of something that Ryu, that move seemed to be so planned out, you know, and I'm not necessarily for overly pre-planned moves or taking away non-proximity normals, but that was an example of a great amazing move that if you think about it kind of works, right? But that isn't the only example in this game, right, of stuff like that. So if we were to look here, right, if we were to see my normals in this game, right, do you see my bottom hurt box is not really moving? And that was what I was focusing on here too. And this works with like Charlie, even in Alpha 2, this does work, right? Now, if you recall Charlie compared to Guile in the original Street Fighter Alpha, or Street Fighter 2, I'm sorry, he has the sobat kick, right? But in this game, I have this very slow overhead kick, right? But what Charlie does have in this game is this. Okay, now I want you to look at Ryu here. Now, normally this does not hit ducking opponents, right? But let's look at Ryu here. Let's get Ryu as close as we can. Let's get a little bit closer. That's a pretty good range. Now watch this. Did you see that I hit him? Now let's watch this for a second. He's ducking. Watch this. Do you see that that just perfectly misses him? Right? But if Ryu does this, do you see the hurt box on his head goes up just a little bit? Watch that again. Do you see it's moving forward and up just a little bit, right? And that allows me to smack him. Isn't that interesting? Normally that doesn't work, but that's what I talked about. Alpha, they started adding more so these moves that kind of check certain pokes. And I showed that example in Super Turbo that I've never seen posted before of how when DJ mashes on Duck Strong, a lot of people say that Ryu has nothing that beats that. But believe it or not, Ryu's Stand Fierce actually can beat that. It's not 100%, but it goes from Ryu doesn't have really any good answer to it besides trying to red fireball in between to Ryu can stand fierce it pretty reliably. And I wanted to show that because this is another example of Alpha 1 adding some weird kind of checks to different kind of pokes, right? Because again, if we go here, and this is what that one guy wasn't understanding, right? Do you see my lower hurt box is never moving forward, right? That was the amazing thing, right? This was Ryu's check move, right? But see what happened in Alpha 2, and it's funny, for some reason, I guess they just didn't like the move, and the blue hurt box, the bottom portion, moves forward with Ryu, right? But you see, that's not all Ryu's only move that does that, see? There's no, the bottom isn't moving forward, the bottom isn't moving forward, the bottom isn't moving forward, the bottom isn't forward. The only thing moves forward is if I have an attack like that, then that does. But that doesn't move forward the bottom one, which allows me to check some of these pokes that normally you can't. So you kind of like have that old school idea of Street Fighter 2 whiffing an attack to not go into proximity guard, as well as spacing yourself, combining these two things, and then checking the opponent, right? Whereas if you were to say, again, if you're just to do normal moves, basically any normal move in Street Fighter 2, generally speaking, besides maybe Ryu Stand Short, if you just do, like, say, Ryu's jab, the lower hurt box moves you forward. The lower hurt box moves you forward. The lower hurt box moves. The lower hurt box moves you forward. But Alpha, they changed that to adding a different way to poke, a different way to check during footsies, which is kind of interesting, right? So that's another example of I wanted to show that, and the Charlie example actually still works in Alpha too. He can actually stuff pokes that normally, that doesn't hit a ducking opponent. But it's almost like for Charlie, they're like, oh, fuck. You know what I mean? It's just like, well, he can't really hop kick. If he was out of range, if he was farther away, that would be the footsie here. But then if the guy's going to poke here, boom, I have stand fierce because that will hit you ducking now if you try to do your poke like that. Isn't that pretty interesting? Whereas normally if you didn't, it would whiff. Anyway, there's another super in-depth thing of Alpha that it goes to show that Alpha, despite being a ghetto game, and to be honest, like I've always said, dude, I feel like Alpha is, goddamn, Alpha 1 is a fucking ugly game. It is it is comically ugly, right? It's really fucking bad, dude. It's a bad looking game. You know, Alpha 2's is a much cooler looking game, a much better vibe. Alpha 3 has its own vibe, a much more interesting vibe. Alpha 1 is just, well, it's Alpha 1. It's got a little bit of novelty charm. But if you actually get down to how the game plays, I'll say it before and I'll say it again. I think Alpha 1 is a better made game than Alpha 2. Hell, I think it's probably better made than Alpha 3 actually as well. But Alpha 3 is such a different fucking beast. It's basically, Alpha 3 is such a completely different, it's almost like a different series at that point once we get to Alpha 3. But anyway, there's a deep dive for footsie thing. And, you know, I'm not sure if there's other moves in Super Turbo like that I can think of offhand specifically. I know I showed that Ryu example versus DJ because it's just it's something I've never seen talked about in my entire life. In all my years playing since Street Fighter 2, I've never seen that actually ever mentioned. But that is something that I know about, and yeah, so I was kind of thinking of that. Anyway, remember if you like the videos, like, subscribe, comment, share, support the channel if you want. Appreciate it. Thanks. The end.